There's been this reporting today on this Facebook group. It's Border Patrol agents, and they're posting about all sorts of things, including what they call jokes about migrant deaths. ProPublica revealed the group. Now, as I mentioned with some of the other reporting, we're bringing to you what we know. NBC has not, we haven't gotten our hands and verified the group or the post. But based on their reporting at ProPublica, they cite group members responding basically with what they look at as wisecracks to a news story about a 16-year-old Guatemalan migrant who died while in custody. An agent writing allegedly, "Oh, well." Another posting, quote, "If he dies, he dies." Now, this ProPublica reporting also talks about something was just mentioned, sexist memes, a vulgar illustration of Democratic Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Now, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol says they're investigating this and going to figure out what went on, saying the posts, if true, are completely inappropriate. For more depth on this, I actually want to bring in to our conversation a former Border Patrol agent, Jen Budd. She served in San Diego 6 years before ultimately leaving the force. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Your reaction?
I'm not surprised at all. This has been the way the Border Patrol has been run since probably before even I was an agent. There's a reason why only 5% of agents are females, and it's not contrary to what the chief says. It's not because the work is very difficult. Women can handle it just fine. It's because a lot of them are sexually assaulted and harassed in the agency, and it starts in the academy, and it's the type of environment and the atmosphere that the Border Patrol condones and allows to continue and has for decades.
So those writings that ProPublica sources to current officials, they strike you as how typical of what you saw and experienced, both, shall we say, online or also offline in conversation and in your work?
They're very typical. I would say that if you're in the agency yourself, then it's much worse. Female agents, it's not unheard of to be raped and assaulted by their classmates in the academy like I was. And you're not allowed to report this or else you will lose your job. You're not allowed to file a complaint or else you will lose your job because they have to investigate and so forth. And the people that commit these atrocities and write these things or say these things, they continue on. And everybody knows about it. It's the dirty little secrets of the Border Patrol. And every time one of their agents does something like this or somebody discovers a secret page or website or whatever, the management always says, well, this is just not like us. We're honorable. We only want the most honorable people. But yet it keeps happening over and over and over again. And
I appreciate you, being willing to talk about this. I don't imagine that's easy.
No.
I want to ask you about the enforcement aspect, and then I want to let Michelle, a panelist, journalist here, also ask you a question after me.
Okay.
But my question goes then to everything you've already said, as we say in the law, allegedly or if true, sounds horrific, criminal, unacceptable, period. Then there's the second layer of what ProPublica and others are reporting here, which is, does that also, in addition, taint or corrupt the way these agents do their jobs? So number one, are they mistreating, as you just alleged and explained in your history, your story, each other or others? And then two, in your experience, though, did it also bias or corrupt the way they were supposed to do their jobs, which is they're in charge. All the pictures we just showed at the top of our broadcast, they're in charge of these people. They have control over these people. Did you experience or observe that also as an impact?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the academy, if we're trying to talk about how, like you said, how it affects how you enforce, you have to remember that 52% of the force is Latino. And a lot of people ask me, how do they get Latino people then to behave this way against people who are of their own heritage and their own culture? And it's because in the academy, they mandate and they teach the agents to use racist terms for migrants, so that they see these people as other and that they are not like them. And it's not uncommon, it's very frequent for Border Patrol agents to arrest women coming across the border and then set up dates afterwards with them on the south side. It's not uncommon for many sexual assaults to be filed against agents. And so I think definitely it does have an effect. It's condoned. And when it happens, and if somebody complains, everybody groups together, specifically more the male side, and they protect each other, and they push everything out, and they stay quiet, and that's how it works.
I mean, I'd be curious to know where you come down on the kind of malice versus incompetence question, because obviously one of the things that supporters of Border Patrol are saying is that they're just overwhelmed and under-resourced. That was part of the justification for Congress just giving them this huge new budget supplement. And so I'm curious, from what you know, is it that they're operating on a shoestring and don't have the resources to deal with this influx, or do you think it's more about kind of sadism and punishment?
You know, I would compare it to when I was an agent. We had about less than 5,000 agents for the southern border, and per year we would get an average of about 1.5 million apprehensions. Today they have roughly 19 to 20,000 agents, and this year has increased, but they are nowhere near the numbers that we used to have. So with 4 times the amount of agents, they seem to be able to do a lot less than what we had to handle back then. So they should be able to handle this. The demographics have been changing over the years, but they've had decades to deal with this situation. This is not a criminal law enforcement situation. This is a humanitarian asylum situation, and asylum is not a crime.
Right. And you mentioned something Paola mentioned earlier, and that we've reported on repeatedly here, which again is, even for folks who watch this and have a view about immigration, a view about border crossings, we're not looking at what is supposed to be a criminal punishment setting. We are looking at what is supposed to be temporary detention. Jen, as I said before, I appreciate you sharing your story. I should mention again, as I sometimes do in our reporting, that DHS, of course, says they're investigating the incidents that led into our discussion. And, of course, we invite them on to discuss any of this, as we often send out requests to the Trump administration. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.